Everybody settle down and let's get started. We have a long night ahead of us. If the kibitzing continues, there will be discipline. First thing I'd like to do is, Alan, once again abuse you by starting Samantha. This is Samantha's first meeting. Why don't you introduce yourself? We do this to make sure we've got a quorum, so
Sure.
start with you.
Good evening, Sam Phillips. I am the Director of the Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency.
And is replacing Kurt Swartz.
I'm Pat Chiramola, representing the Old Colony Planning Council.
Joe Coughlin, appointed Town of Plymouth Nuclear Matters Committee.
Hein Dubois, appointed by the Speaker of the House of Representatives.
John Flores, appointed by the Governor's Office.
Bob Hayden, Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities.
Gerard Martin, Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, sitting in for Dave Johnson tonight.
Robert Jones, Health and Human Services.
Rich Grassi, House Minority.
Kevin O'Reilly, Town of Plymouth, appointed by the Speaker of the House.
Sean Mullen, Town of Plymouth, Senate Minority Leader.
Joe Lynch, representing Entergy.
John Mahoney, Plymouth Board of Selectmen.
David Nichols, appointed by Governor Baker.
Jack Priest, Director of the Radiation Control Program for the Department of Public Health.
Rich Rothstein, Town of Plymouth appointee.
Paul Smith, appointed by the Utility Workers Union of America, representing the good men and women who work at Pilgrim Station.
Daniel Wolf, appointed by the Senate President.
Thank you. We have more than a quorum. I think we have a complete full house this evening. First order of business is to review the minutes that I hope you all received in a timely fashion this time. Are there any comments on the minutes from those of you who've had a chance to review?
Move to accept.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Minutes are unanimously accepted. I'm going to give you a brief update on the IWG, and because of the lights, I can't actually see. Becky, are you here yet? Here. I can't see you standing behind. These are much brighter than you might think. So Becky Ullman, Chief of Staff for the Secretary Beaton's office, will give us a more update. I've had a chance between the meetings to speak with both Becky and with the Attorney General's office. They continue to work deliberately on behalf of the Commonwealth as well as the NDCAP. They're in the middle of really 5 major areas that they're going to be focusing their attention on as they meet with Entergy and with Holtec. Obviously, the financial area is a big concern, so we'll be getting into that more this evening. The radiological, the non-radiological, the emergency planning zone, and then the reporting requirements during decommissioning. That pretty much sum up what you're working on, Becky?
I would also add environmental...
Come on, please, you're up.
Moving less quickly. I would also add the environmental cleanup standards.
Okay. So if you can give us a little bit of a more detailed update, I know, and explain why it's difficult at this point to give a public update in the sense, that would be helpful to everybody.
Sure, and I thought maybe I'd start there. Sean, we had a conversation with the AG's office, and they're not here tonight, but gave me a couple talking points to sort of explain the legal relationship so that I don't mess it up. I'm just going to read those. So from the Attorney General's office, sharing information that concerned our litigation strategy could be viewed as a waiver of our attorney-client privilege and used to compromise our positions in the litigation or any related negotiations. And sharing information about possible settlement options or settlement discussions are treated as confidential communications, the disclosure of which could compromise the ability to reach an agreement that is favorable to the Commonwealth at this time. I understand that that is a frustrating position for the panel, but I think I'm here to listen and will certainly take input and anything that you have to say as under consideration to share with our colleagues.
So in layman's terms, you can go first, Joe.
Appreciating the limitations of what we can discuss and not discuss, but not related to the motion. motion to intervene. The chairman had mentioned that the IWG has been involved in is involved in 5 different areas. Can you provide us a little more update on what's going on in those areas, either tonight or in writing, so that we have a little more understanding of the substance of what the IWG's been working on in the weekly meetings? Again, the motion to intervene aside, but the other things.
Tricky. And I just want to clarify that the interagency working group was convened as a mechanism for getting greater coordination amongst the administration and figuring out where all the parts of decommissioning are happening throughout our agencies. We've done that. We have good contacts. We have good and clear communication channels set up with the relevant agencies. And so since our early days of convening a very large group in a big conference room with a bunch of people, we've since moved on to sort of a secondary mode of operation, which is working very closely with the Attorney General's office and the experts in those agencies to further dive into the issues and identify sort of what the Commonwealth is looking for. So without my lawyers present, this is a big group, and I want to be sensitive to the litigation strategy.
Okay, but I guess I'm a little confused. I understand the litigation issue, and we'll just keep that aside. But the other kinds of issues, such as you had mentioned in November at our November meeting, that you all had reviewed the PSDARs and so forth, and there was a closure date at the NRC for comments and so forth. And what's the current status of whether the IWG, if they will be making any comments to the NRC on those documents or anything else in the documents that were filed in November?
Oh, sure, absolutely. So on March 4th, we submitted comments to the Holtec PSDAR, and tomorrow we'll be submitting the comments to the Entergy PSDAR. I believe those are both public documents, and if links need to be circulated, happy to do that.
Thank you.
Fine.
Hi, Becky.
Hi.
Can you give us any idea of the kind of timing of the intervention and sort of what it looks like, and when we might be able to rely on you, or if we have to go a different route, if you will, to understand, the sort of cleanup, how you're going to approach, how the agencies really are going to approach this, or if, in fact, an MOU will evolve out of the process?
Sure. I think, so the motion was filed, and then I believe it's posted on the NRC website, but Holtec and Entergy, looking for my colleagues, submitted a response to that motion, and I believe those are on the NRC website now. And we just received word today that our answer to the company's response is due on April 1st, which is an extension of a couple weeks, which gives us a little more time to work. So that'll be the next step. We have asked the NRC if they have any timelines, and Joe, I'm sure you have as well, but not a lot of guidance on what that looks like.
In terms of what their decision, if that's the proper...
Allowing the motion first as a procedural step, and then deciding on the motion as a secondary step.
So just for clarification, is this the NRC lawyers, or is this the commission that we're dealing with, that you're dealing with?
Gosh, that's a good question, and I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm talking to officials who have nrc.gov at the end of their email addresses, and I know their positions, but I'm not sure if they're considered the commission or staff.
The commission will actually make the decision on whether to grant status and the hearing.
So the commission is in charge of the whole schedule, the decision-making process?
Well, the commission will make a decision on whether a hearing will be granted to either of the interveners, and then if a hearing is granted, then they'll assign Atomic Safety and Licensing Board to hear those arguments.
And is that, sorry, Sean, may I?
No, yeah, I was
Rapid
just,
succession, or, is that a matter of a month, or is that a matter of a year? Do you know?
Well, the decision on the part of the commission, as Becky has said, is uncertain. It'll be several months. They're supposed to use a 100-day guideline, but it's a
I thought I had
guideline.
seen 90 somewhere.
Once they make a decision, if it's to schedule a hearing, that would happen fairly quickly, but then there's discovery and preparations and things like that. So it's a fairly long, drawn-out process.
if I could just add a little bit, I've talked with Amy Snyder, who you may recall was here, and she's ultimately going to get the responsibility once it transitions. And Amy told me, as of our last conversation, that they do not have a timeline for this. They have not yet determined what the schedule will be, and I think we're seeing that, and I think that's what you're hearing. So,
Becky, 4 Points is still your retained consultant supporting the IWG?
That's correct, yes.
Are they going to be engaging in any new studies on behalf of the IWG in the foreseeable than what they already were chartered to do initially?
I would say that the scope of work that they were hired to do is continuing. They've been excellent resources for the entire process, and they've been involved in the motion, in the PSDAR comments, and general consulting. So that's been a very successful relationship.
Okay, good, glad to hear that. Is there any issue with any members of the panel being able to review any documents or recommendations that they're putting together? Because some of us on this panel may have similar knowledge or expertise on some of the topics that they're engaging in on behalf of the IWG.
Sure, as hired contractors supporting the motion work, obviously their work is as confidential as as state employees' work. They have contributed or advised the administration and the Attorney General's office on things like the PSDAR comments, which would be public.
so is that a yes that you'll share the data, or is that a no because of the same? Because that was your question, right? Will they give us the data?
Pretty much.
I'm not quite sure what we mean by data.
Will they give us reports that they have prepared on behalf of the state at this point?
And I think my response to that is that the work product that they've contributed to are the two public documents, the PSDARs as well as the motion.
That answer your question?
Mostly. I guess my concern is that I appreciate from what you were saying before, Becky, a lot of things have to be handled in a confidential manner, and it's a challenge for our panel having to follow open meeting law where things can't be discussed internally openly until we come to these meetings like this. So I feel there's a potential problem that recommendations could be developed. I'm not trying to second guess 4 Points or anybody else, but when this panel doesn't have an opportunity to review things ahead of time, something could be lost in the translation. And even if we get things after the fact, the cow might be out of the barn, as they say.
Paul, did you have?
Through the chair, Ms. Becky, thank you for being here tonight. Pilgrim is not the first nuclear power plant in the Commonwealth to be decommissioned. Yankee Row ran for well-nigh 40 years, and it was decommissioned under a regulated atmosphere, and today we're now in a deregulated arena. Do we expect the involvement of the Attorney General to end up in anything better than the decommissioning of Yankee Row, which was kind of the gold standard, where money was no object? Or is that the goal?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm quite qualified to speak to that because I am much less familiar with the deal that resulted at Yankee Row. So, we can take that back and take a look, but that's not a question I can probably answer right now.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the panel? Hearing none, Becky, thanks very much for coming down. Do appreciate it. I just want to close by saying, as we've talked on behalf of the panel, you can certainly sense the frustration. While we understand the legal constraints you're under, I want you to understand, and we'll continue to press for first, the NDCAP to be involved. And there's frustration there that we haven't, even though we know you're working on it, that we feel like we should play a role in that. And that second, we wish there could be more sharing of information. We understand, we may not agree, and, but that's the nature of it. But thank you very much. We do appreciate you coming down. With that, we're going to move on to our next agenda item, which is Andrea Sturtis from Holtec. Hello, Andrea. Thank you very much for coming. You're welcome. You can sit, it'll be more comfortable for you.
Okay.
Before we get started, Andrea, I've got a couple of questions for you, and then I'm going to turn it over to the vice chair, and then I'll open it up for questions. But we've got quite a few folks here that we don't usually have, which is great. So they must have known you were coming. At least I hope they did. Because of that, a few of the questions I'm going to ask to begin with may seem like they're simple and obvious, but I think it would lay the groundwork. So the first one is, where's the funding for the new independent spent fuel storage installations, the dry cask? Where does that funding come from?
So, as you know, I'm the HDI VP for Regulatory and Environmental Affairs. I did oversee the preparation of the HDI decommissioning cost estimate and the PSDAR. And so I can address that the funding that is in that document that's an estimate is a funding level that is based on the contracts that that are underway, that will be implemented assuming the NRC approves the license transfer and Holtec does close on the sale, that we will be overseeing the installation of that new ISFC.
So this will really, I didn't expect that answer, so this is very helpful. So the contract to do the new dry cask storage pad in the 70 cask, Holtec doesn't currently have a contract with Entergy to do that?
Joe, I'm not sure the actual status of that contract is negotiated between Holtec and Entergy and will be executed regardless of whether or not the license transfer is approved and the sale transaction is completed. I'm not sure I know exactly what the status is of that contract.
Yeah, you're correct about how the contract is being structured, and I don't know if it's completed or if it's being phased, but I know we have contracted certain services up to this point, but I'm not aware whether we have a comprehensive contract for the whole scope.
But I appreciate the question, and I certainly can take it back.
Well,
and
I'm going to go
get you-
back to the first one. If you should receive that contract, where is the money for that coming from?
That estimate is included in our decommissioning cost estimate.
So are you taking the money for that out of the DTF, or are you taking the money for that from the Department of Energy's Judicial Awards Fund, like all of the others have done?
The decommissioning cost estimate process that's regulated by the NRC under 10 CFR 50.75 and 50.83 does not permit without an exemption request us to use the trust fund. However, we have submitted that trust fund exemption request. If the NRC approves that, as well as the license transfer and the sale closure and license transfer are executed, then we will be using the monies as requested under that application.
So I want to make sure I get this right, Andrea. You're saying that if the exemption is approved, that the costs of the new pad, the moving, the storage of the new pad will come from the decommissioning trust fund. It won't come from another source.
What I said was, under the NRC regulations, I must submit an application that shows, without consideration of DOE monies, that I can satisfy the requirements to decommission and to fulfill the obligations of the 10 CFR 5054 Bravo requirements to manage the spent fuel.
So as of today, what you're saying is that the monies for the new pad and all of that will come out of the decommissioning trust fund?
No, what I'm saying is that my application has to model it to show there's sufficient funds to do that to cover those costs.
Where will the funding for the decommissioning of Pilgrim come from?
Under the regulations, again, my cost estimate appropriately estimates those and places those in the category of license termination costs.
And where did those monies come from?
Again, I can only tell you what the decommissioning cost estimate that I was,
So
that I put
you're
together.
telling, I don't mean to interrupt, but you don't know where the monies for the DTF came from?
Oh, where the monies came from? They, under the regulations from the NRC,
Right?
anyone who operates a plant, this is again under 50.75
Yeah.
and 50.33, that they must place money in a set aside.
Who must place it? Who paid the
The
money?
utility, the owner of the plant.
So the Entergy put the money in the trust fund? Please. Entergy put the money in the trust fund?
So this plant was originally owned by Boston Edison, and there have been transactions that have occurred over the ownerships. And so, no, I am not an expert on where the actual funds came from.
So you don't know today,
I
even though
know,
you
I know where
prepared
the
it,
funds will come from if we complete the transaction.
but you don't know how the funds, the 1.28, was it, of the last month? You don't know how those monies got there.
They were done under the requirements of the NRC.
That's not what I'm asking. Who paid that money? Simple. I mean, I think everybody here could probably answer the question. It was the ratepayers. That'll help. I hope that helps. It was the ratepayers that paid the money, correct, Joe?
That's correct.
It was the ratepayers, taxpayers, people that paid the bill.
Understood.
Okay, if it's approved, and we all hope it is, quite frankly, where will the funding to move the spent fuel to, if you get approved with the Lee County, New Mexico site? And you've said that that would be a potential to move it. Where will the monies for those activities come from?
At this point in time, those are activities that will occur years down the road. It would be irresponsible of me to speculate on how that will be funded.
Okay, so you can't answer that question.
I said it would be irresponsible of me to speculate on how that will be funded.
So let me back up then to the first one. For the new pads, it's going to come from one or two sources. It sounds like, and correct me, Joe, please jump in if I'm wrong. It's either going to come from the DOE's judicial award account, as it has for all the past ones that have been litigated by the energy provider, or it's going to come from the decommissioning trust fund if it's part of your budget that you put in. In either case, that's taxpayers' dollars. Is that accurate?
It's taxpayers' dollars?
Yeah, either ratepayers or taxpayers paid the money that you're going to ultimately receive to provide these services.
That's correct.
Okay, that is exactly what I wanted to hear. So it's not Entergy, it's ratepayers and taxpayers that are going to fund this project. It's not coming out of Entergy's budget, for example, that you're going to get reimbursed either from the DTF or from a judicial award, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So I just want to clarify and make sure I understand that Holtec and Entergy don't currently have a contract to complete and construct the dry cask storage. Is that accurate?
Now, as I indicated, I'm not sure the status of the contract.
Okay,
I did not come prepared to address that statement
okay.
or question.
So you don't know the answer to that? Okay. Does Holtec prepare to file suit in federal court to recover the cost if the transfer is done, to recover the cost for the dry cask storage? Are you going to file suit?
So up to this point, our focus has been to pursue the license transfer approval and to work with the forward on obtaining the transaction sale closure. We certainly will look at opportunities on how to pursue reimbursement from the DOE as appropriate. But again, those are not, we don't own the plant. We are not assured of NRC approval of the license transfer, and we're not at the point where we can speculate or plan what we might be doing 10 years down the road.
I would just tell you, Andrea, and I think you've heard this from me before, speaking personally for myself, I have grown weary of this 1 foot in, 1 foot out routine that we're hearing from Holtec and Entergy over the past several months. You can't have it both ways. Either you've laid out a plan to fully do the decommissioning, and we're gonna get into whether there's assurances there financially to do that, or you can say, I don't really know. So if you don't know at this point, let's walk through this. You've put your budget together for the decommissioning out of the DTF. You've submitted it in accordance with the NRC's requirements.
Correct.
That includes today the amount of money required to do the pads. If you then turn around and sue the DOE for its breach of the federal contract, which has been done successfully by all of the other providers, once you own it, are you telling me that you're not going to then get that money and deduct it from what you put in the DTF budget? How does that work? Explain it to me.
Again, we have supplied the decommissioning cost estimate in accordance with the NRC regulation. And we have shown that with that, we have financial assurance that we can complete the tasks. We will submit annually a report that shows how our expenditures are being reimbursed from the NDT on an annual basis. We will also include in there updates on what the remaining decommissioning costs and activities are, as well as what the 10 CFR 5054 Bravo costs are to manage spent fuel.
Let me ask you, how much is Holtec going to charge for the construction of the dry cask?
Again, I am not part of the Holtec team working on that contract. I can appreciate that question, and I can take it back, and we can have Holtec folks come to a subsequent NDCAP to talk with you about that.
We had this discussion 5-6 months ago with Pierre. It's a really simple question. How much are you going to charge? You can't answer that?
No, I work in the decommissioning arm.
Okay. But you built the budget. How much did you build into the budget for the decommissioning?
So again, there is, how much did I build into the budget for
You said,
decommissioning?
again, that's why I went over it several times. You built into the budget the cost to complete the entire project on the decommissioning, including the new pad and, right, you built that in, right?
That's right.
How much did you put in the budget?
There's a methodology that we used that includes all the spent fuel management costs.
How much?
Off the top of my head, I'm sorry, that's available publicly. It's in the DCE that we submitted on the docket.
And you don't recall how much that was?
No,
A range? A ballpark?
no.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
Your series of very valid questions, a lot of it's unanswered. And I would think, as a suggestion, you might want to follow up with enumerating all of those questions in
we
the way
certainly-
you want the questions
certainly will.
responded, and send it to the head of
I would
Holtec.
say, Joe, that they received most of these questions before this evening's meeting. So let me finish the questions and then we'll
Sorry.
take.
So Sean, at the last meeting, I agreed
Yeah.
to take some notes
Yeah.
during the meeting to capture bringbacks or action items. So
Yeah.
I've capped, so when she finishes her questioning, I'd like the opportunity to read back what I
Absolutely.
captured
That would
as
be great.
bringbacks.
Very helpful,
And then
Joe.
we'll have that in our record.
Okay, very helpful. One last point, because I don't want to keep Andrea all night. What is it, Paul?
Okay, it was through the chair.
Yep.
With all respect. The questions as to the source of the $1 billion, okay, they might be better asked of the DPU, because for 30 of the 40 years that Pilgrim ran, was a regulated utility, and the DPU would know with certainty just what percent of what pennies of what of the ratepayers was collected for this purpose. If we think of our guest,
Yep.
okay, as to clean up the site, won't be taking part in any of that collection of the decommissioning
I'm just
fund, but-
interested, are these taxpayers' dollars, ratepayers' dollars, or are these some corporate dollars? That's all I'm interested in, Paul. And the thing that you and Joe need to understand, Holtec was asked these questions in writing before they ever agreed to attend the meeting. So let me get to the rest of it. What
Excuse
corporate?
me, sir,
Yeah.
I was provided 3 questions.
And what did it say?
It says, so.
Yeah.
Okay.
How much?
So,
Yeah.
So I just want to say that I am here to address the 3 questions that were asked, and that I want to point out that although we are not the licensee for Pilgrim, we have been and continue to be voluntarily supporting this NDCAP process. Our support is driven from our firm commitment to provide communications to the stakeholders, and we do believe, based on our performance for attending and speaking at several, as requested, NDCAP meetings. The first question
Please.
that I was asked was to provide general information, not proprietary information, about what specific assets Holtec will be acquiring.
Please.
Should NRC approve the license transfer application jointly prepared and submitted by Entergy and Holtec on November 16th, 2018, and the sale is completed, 100% of the equity interests in the ENGC, Entergy Nuclear Generation Company, will be transferred to Holtec pursuant to the terms of an equity purchase and sale agreement, or EPSA. The publicly available information regarded in the transaction can be found in the publicly available license transfer application, which states that the transfer includes the plant, the equipment, and the land. As a result of the equity transfer, the Pilgrim spent fuel and other site liabilities will also transfer to Holtec. The transaction details beyond this are business confidential to Holtec and Entergy.
Okay. Thank you for that
The
answer.
second question that I had was regarding Holtec's plans regarding the 1,500 acres of land. Holtec is very well aware of the importance of the Pilgrim property as communicated both directly from town leadership and Entergy. Our focus right now, as I said a little bit earlier, is on seeking NRC approval of the license transfer, which is a prerequisite to discussing assets like the land, which are included in the agreement. As you are aware, the majority of the land, 1,500 acres, is protected forest under Chapter 61 of the Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation until 2022. Of that 1,500 acres, approximately 375 acres are included in the NRC license and won't be released until the final status survey at the end of decommissioning. Given the land requires a number of actions that take place years from now, it would be irresponsible to speculate on any plan at this time. However, Holtec is committed to working with the town as our plans become better defined.
Okay. We can get to the third
The
question.
third question is an explanation of Holtec's thoughts on the NPDES permit cited in our NRC submissions, specifically cited in the PSDAR. Holtec relied on the most recent and applicable information in developing its NRC submissions. We reviewed the current NPDES permit that expired in the 1990s but is still in force, any specific letter agreements between Entergy and the EPA/MDEP, as well as the draft NPDES permit renewal that was provided for public comment last year. This information, along with the experience and expertise of our team, informed the details in our submittals and conservative assumptions in our decommissioning cost estimate. In addition, we considered environmentally compliant practices for addressing the processing of water, handling of waste, and discharges during decommissioning. We will be working closely with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, including the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection and the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, as we work through these compliance issues. I also want to point out that the NRC license application, as you know, as Becky Ullman discussed, is currently going through the application review process at the NRC. On Monday, March 18th, Entergy and Holtec jointly prepared and filed responses to the petitions filed by the Massachusetts Attorney General and Pilgrim Watch. Since we are still in that process, similar to what Becky stated, I am not permitted to provide any information regarding topics that are covered are being covered under the legal proceedings.
Okay.
Thank you.
So let me go back to your first answer, just to make sure we understand this. You said that Holtec is buying the assets from Entergy.
That's correct.
Where is Holtec getting the funding to do that?
That's proprietary business confidential information.
Of course it is, yeah. Okay. So you won't tell us where those funds are coming from? That is Holtec going to do it out of operating capital? Are they doing a capital?
I have nothing further to add.
Okay. Will you, at some point, determine whether or not you'll donate the land to the town of Plymouth?
As I said, it would be irresponsible for us to discuss that, but we will be working with the town.
Before I pass it on to the other members for their questions, I'm just going to tell you that the answers that you provided are completely and utterly disappointing and unacceptable. We are less than 75, no, stop. We're less than 75 days away from this transition of the power plant. We have been patient, starting with your colleagues, Pierre et al., in listening and waiting for these answers. The full lack of transparency, from my perspective, speaking as an individual member and not as the chair, is so appalling that you will not tell us the basic information about the transaction financially by itself, in my opinion, makes you guys questionable beyond anything else. That's all I have to say. Thank you for coming, but that was a disgrace.
Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
Senator Wolf has a
Yeah, go ahead, Senator.
cognizant point.
Yeah, this is going to be a question, but it's not going to sound like one at the beginning. But I just want to understand the financial transaction over the last number of years. And when I get off the rails, would you please just interrupt me and tell me I got something wrong? Mr. Chairman, it seems to me that what you are outlining as you were asking those questions is that the ratepayers, and by extension taxpayers, because there is a huge overlap, over the years that the plant was operating, were paying a certain amount through their rates that were then put into the decommissioning trust fund to be used for the purposes of decommissioning the plant. So far I'm on, right?
As far as I
It is also, in the environment of utilities and the operation of utilities, acceptable that a plant, while operating and generating electricity, make profit and return to the investors. That is part of the deal. My question would be twofold. One is, if there wasn't a license transfer, would Entergy be making a profit on the decommissioning, on the process of decommissioning and the $1.028 billion that would go towards the decommissioning? And if the answer is no, then why would we be looking at a transfer to Holtec, which would only be accepting it so that they could do a business transaction which would spin a profit off to its investors? It really seems to me that the reason that the ratepayers were paying into this for the decommissioning was not to create another level of profit for a new group of investors. It was so that when Entergy was done running the plant and generating a profit for its investors, it would take the money collected from the ratepayers over the years that the plant operated and put all of that money into decommissioning, restoring the site, and doing the responsible thing after the shutdown. And I guess my question is, I don't understand whether somebody from Entergy or somebody from Holtec or somebody from the new entity, because it sounds like there's now going to be another entity that is going to be receiving funds. I don't understand why an investor would invest in that entity unless there was going to be profit derived from the decommissioning trust fund that the ratepayers paid, that was intended to decommission the plant, that is now being used to profit and be distributed to the investors of either the new company or Holtec. I am completely at a loss for how the finances in this work. Now, I guess I said, would somebody interrupt me if I'm getting part of this wrong? And I wasn't interrupted. So I'm going to just leave the following question, and maybe somebody from Entergy could answer it. Would Entergy be making a profit from the decommissioning trust fund if they oversaw the decommissioning of the plant and the license wasn't transferred?
No.
And if the answer is no, then why is it acceptable for a new entity to come in and call some of that $1.028 billion profit for the investors in that new company?
And
minute,
allow
in
me
a-
to interrupt, because I think.
If you could, if you could respond.
Shouldn't be interrupted.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
I obviously got it wrong then.
No, only because I happen to have started working at Pilgrim in 1968. So I saw deregulation. Massachusetts was the first state in the nation to deregulate its utilities. The DPU would be aware of that, okay? And it was the state legislature who passed that in 1993. So it was the 720-something good people who worked at Pilgrim Station who were affected by that, as every major power plant in the Commonwealth was sold, and it was sold at a profit. Pilgrim happened to have had a decommissioning trust fund, just like Yankee Row had a decommissioning trust fund, and that was money that was put aside recognizing that the plant and the field would have to be restored to green field. Okay, so now Entergy purchased Pilgrim Station in 1999, and from it, it also received the decommissioning trust fund at that time, which was probably $560 million. It has only grown since to this now $1 billion. And as we, okay, sitting in our subcommittee, okay, we looked at what is the priority for the NDCAP. One of the priorities was a rapid decommissioning. Pilgrim Station, if left to the Entergy Corporation, would go into safe store. That was explained at length and over multiple meetings to the entire NDCAP. So if we had wished to keep the decommissioning trust fund intact, untouched, nobody making a profit off of it, then we would sit with the Pilgrim Station as it is for the next 60 years. That was found unacceptable by the town, and I think the vast majority of members here. So it was encouraged, okay, and I think, Ms. Pine, you were instrumental in that, okay? We encouraged Entergy to find people that would be willing to purchase it and to do a rapid decommissioning. The fact that there are companies out there, and there are more than one, but there's only one that's a guest of us discussing it with us tonight.
And that's a good point, because what I'd like to do, not to cut you off, Paul, I'd like to get to more questions of Andrea while we have it her here. So, Kevin?
Hi, Andrea. Hopefully, these will be a little easier. I want to go back to the request of the Plymouth Board of Selectmen that was unanimously approved back in November, and see if I can get an update from you on the 15 requests that the town had put forth. And if you need a copy, I have an extra copy up here, but I'll try to just summarize them and go through them very quickly. And the first one, I think, is the easy one, is moving the long-term storage location further away from Cape Cod Bay. Well, thank you, Entergy. We know what happened here. I don't know if there's anything else you want to tell us about that, but I think everybody's pleased with that. The second request of the Board of Selectmen was to have an agreement to commit to 10 milliramp standard. Is there any update on that?
So, as I said back in November when I was here discussing the PSDAR, we are targeted right now for obtaining NRC approval to release the property from the Part 50 license once the decommissioning is done. We will do that in accordance with the NRC's criteria. At this point, we are engaged in discussions with the Commonwealth, and we are open to discussions that will lead to the potential compliance with that regulation.
With the 10 milliram or the 25 milliram?
We have to meet the 25 milliram with the Commonwealth's criteria, is where we're in discussions with the Commonwealth.
If I could
Yeah, get through the
go
questions.
through and then.
Everybody will get their shot, unfortunately.
The third item on the town's list was the transfer of the 1,500 acres. You've answered that a couple of times. I will say that there's no requirement that you have to wait until 2022. That can be taken out of Chapter 61A at any time. The owner would have to pay the back taxes on it, but that is possible to do, and it has been done in this town previously. Fourth point, request of the town would be related to the annual payments by Holtec to the town until 180 days after the last assembly is moved and secured in dry cask. And thereafter, the request was for $9.25 million per year, and then ongoing payments to be negotiated with the town. Has there been any discussion with the town on that?
We are not in discussions actively, but I know Joe Lynch is participating in discussions with the town regarding the safe store continued payments. At this point, we are not the licensee. We have not received license approval, and so we are not in discussions at this point.
Okay, I'm starting to see a pattern, but I'll keep going anyway. Number 6, annual payments by Holtec to support and maintain the current levels of community and charitable donations until 180 days after the last assembly, and thereafter to be mutually agreed upon. I'm going to guess I know the answer, but I'll ask it anyway.
Again, we are not in those discussions at this time.
Okay.
Through the chair,
Wait a minute, Paul, let's get through the questions and then we'll get it.
that's my point. The questions really should be going to Entergy. I don't know why we're asking the person
That's
who
why-
doesn't own the property.
What we're looking for,
But I will say in response to that, that this was a request of the Board of Selectmen of the town of Plymouth to Holtec. That's why I'm asking Holtec.
The good Mr. O'Reilly, okay, I don't disagree that that is what the town of Plymouth Board of Selectmen were guided into asking, okay? Not all of which are good things for the town of Plymouth, but perhaps it's inappropriate to ask someone who doesn't own the property or control the funds.
let me try to settle this once and for all
I'm
tonight.
not trying to
No,
defend our
and you're
guy.
not being argumentative either, Paul. Let me try to settle it once and for all. The panel has the statutory requirement to provide advice to the governor, to the legislature, to the public on this decommissioning process.
Yes, sir?
If Holtec is actively seeking a transfer and an acquisition out of this, we should know what we're buying. In really simple terms, we should understand, since every dollar that I heard is a public taxpayer's, ratepayer's dollar, we should have some visibility into what this looks like. And the fact that Holtec refuses gives me pause to understand, well, what are we buying? So let's, Mr. O'Reilly, go forward, and then you can have all the time you
And
need.
I'm trying not to be controversial, I'm just trying to get information from something that was voted on back in November, to see if we can get an update. And I'm almost done. We're halfway, this will get us almost halfway there. 7, written assurances and financial guarantees from Holtec LLC that the parent corporation and its successors will assume responsibility and liabilities for Pilgrim's decommissioning costs if there are insufficient funds in the decommissioning trust fund. And I'm guessing no discussion with the
That financial
town.
assurance is provided under the NRC regulations, and we have submitted an application that addresses those requirements, and the
Okay.
NRC is reviewing it.
Thank you. Written assurance and financial guarantees that you will address, remove, and remediate previously unknown radiological, non-radiological, and environmental conditions which are discovered during decommissioning.
And again, those are addressed and covered by the NRC's regulations, and our PSDAR, as well as the license transfer application, clearly address those regulations.
Moving along. Written assurance and financial guarantees that you will provide sufficient annual funding to the Mass Department of Public Health to pay for off-site radiological monitoring and testing until the spent fuel is removed.
And again, we're in discussions with the Commonwealth, including the Department of Public Health.
Okay. 10, written assurance and financial guarantees that you will provide sufficient security to protect the spent fuel during, in dry cask storage at a level mutually agreed upon with the appropriate state agencies until the spent fuel is removed.
The security for the spent fuel protection is governed by the NRC's regulations and our commitment and our plan as described in the PSDAR, as well as the estimates associated with those tasks comply with the NRC regulations for providing adequate security.
Okay, almost there. Assurance, the Holtec will provide detailed financial reports to the appropriate state agencies and NDCAP on an annual basis, starting 6 months after the approval of the transfer.
We are required annually by NRC regulation to provide detailed updates, and they're provided every March of every year, as Entergy does now. But as you move into decommissioning, the annual reports that are provided by March 31st of each year will show what we have spent on the decommissioning and what is remaining to be performed, and verification that there's still sufficient funding in the nuclear decommissioning trust funds. That is all governed by NRC regulation, specifically 10 CFR 50.75.
Okay. Written assurance and financial guarantees that you will retain responsibility and liability for repairing or replacing any dry casts that crack or leak in the future, including but not limited to any costs associated with damages resulting from a failure or defect with the casts.
Again, as the liabilities associated with the spent fuel are transferred if the NRC approves the license transfer, and if the sale closure is completed, those liabilities associated with the spent fuel management will be retained by Holtec. And it's also, again, covered under NRC regulation.
Written assurances and guarantees that you will base its decommissioning plans and cost estimates on the assumption that the spent fuel will be stored on-site indefinitely, which is a huge concern to the folks here in Plymouth.
So again, that liability remains with Holtec, and our application and our estimates are being reviewed by the NRC under their regulations.
2 more. Written assurances and financial guarantees that you will agree to remediate or remove any structural materials or soil containing detectable tritium, regardless of whether the levels detected is below NRC requirements for license termination.
And again, for partial site release of the property, we will follow, from the Part 50 license, we will follow the NRC's requirements. However, we are in discussions with the Commonwealth, and we are open to discussing the final release criteria.
Last one, and I'll have one comment. Written assurances upon completion, the existing Pilgrim site will be restored, released, and transferred to the town of Plymouth.
Again, I think it would be irresponsible for me to speculate on what happens with the property years down the road.
So I thank you for your responses. I'm a little discouraged that in all of the responses, you refer to either the NRC or the Commonwealth, and I'm wondering, has anybody from your company submitted any kind of formal response to the town on this request that they made?
Not that I'm aware of.
Do you plan to before the license is transferred?
I can't answer that question.
Well, I would encourage you to do so,
I
please.
appreciate the question. I'll
Thank
take
you.
it back.
Pine, since Andrea was kind enough to bring up the third question, which was the permitting, do you have any comments you'd like to make on that before we open it up to everybody?
I do, Andrea, if you don't mind. And I'm rooting for Holtec, actually. I can't imagine why you want to do this. I'm glad you want to do this. I would like to understand better what Holtec is getting out of it and why you believe so confidently that this is what you want to do for the rest of the company's life. You know, because that's what it seems to me. It seems like this is an endeavor to, to create, that it's a mission to address a problem that the rest of the world can't really wrap its head around. I can't even get around the money issue. So I appreciate you guys getting around the money issue. My issue is the environment, that you, in your PSDAR, talked so much about the draft EPA permit. It led me to think that you must be in conversations with EPA and know something we don't know. Are you in conversations with EPA and know
We are-
something we don't know?
We are not at this time, but as I indicated in my statement, we have to look at a number of permits and licenses as we transition the plant. And we are certainly looking towards working with the Commonwealth departments that are involved and moving forward on the successful maintenance of those permits and licenses, certifications, et cetera, so that we're very committed to staying in compliance with regulations,
Well,
particularly environmental.
But the NIPD's permit is an EPA permit, it's a federal permit, okay? And the fact that the federal permit that expired in 1996 doesn't cover the decommissioning process, that's a real problem, I think, given that the key is going to turn off. And it's not that there aren't, that you can't then comply with the discharge standards or the intake standards, because you could do that because it'll be reduced. But there should be a shift in EPA's approach to this because we're trying to clean up the site rather than continue to allow a discharge. And so a decommissioning process, that NIPD's permit needs to be different. But if it's not different, there's a problem there. And because the EPA and NRC have this so-called memorandum of understanding that addresses some decontamination, but not necessarily all of it, and certainly not when there's a permit that is supposed to be issued in conjunction with the DEP. DEP is a partner in this, but DEP doesn't hold the reins, EPA holds the reins. And as far as my understanding, because of all of your funding estimates, how do you make those estimates when all of that is unclear? And so how do you get to clarity to be able to give us the confidence that you know what you're talking about? And I think that's what our problem is. We're the investors, we're the stockholders here. You know, we put the money in the bank. You know, and so we're asking for that accountability. So how are you going to keep our environment clean is my question within your budget without saying, oh, well, nobody's going to know because they can't really tell us what tritium does to the fish and the plankton and all that sort of stuff. So we're just going to let it go there. Or, you know, oh, well, we didn't fix those cracks. And so when when we're draining the pipes and all that sort of stuff, if it happens to get in and it flows out to the sea, who the hell is going to know? That's the kind of question that I have. So I want to know that within your cost estimate and capabilities, that just like you did in Camden, or maybe better than you did in Camden, are you going to clean up this site so that the Ocean Sanctuaries Act that should govern everything from the time that the key is shut down, I think. CZM's not at the table, but they could be. You know, are you going to comply with standards that protect the environment in Cape Cod Bay, feet from the door of this hazardous waste site? You're the guy in charge.
Yeah,
And I'm glad it's a woman, by the way.
thank you. We are,
She's not going to let up because of that, but she's just glad you're a woman.
no, it's okay. We are committed to comply with regulations. That is where our direction is.
But there's no the regulations, the regulators are asleep at the switch. This is not an uncommon thing. So when the regulators are asleep at the switch, does the company have a moral ethic that includes the environment? Or is it only about the money you're going to walk away with when you leave town? That's what I want to know.
I am held accountable to the regulations. and-
Only the regulations?
Yes.
That means we're going to have to really be extra special careful.
I have no comment.
Before wait a second, you guys talk. Let's start over with Sam, go around, and everybody will get a chance. Sam, do you have any questions or comments?
I don't yet, but I will come back.
Okay, Joe?
Yes.
John? Bobby? Troy? Robert? Richard? Joseph?
I just had one question. At the last meeting, we have a motion to have the US EPA present kind of an update on where they stand with the permit, and that seems to have not made it to our agenda, so I'm just wondering if you can give us a status on that?
I can, actually.
That'd be
I had a
great.
wonderful conversation with George Papadopoulos at the EPA. I explained to him what the panel had discussed about the permit. He was very aware of it, mostly more aware of pine than anything else. But he was very gracious. When I told him, he said, well, I'll have to get this approved by my superiors to attend and inform you. And I really defined it into, we need an explanation on the process. That was 3 weeks ago. I haven't heard back from George. So I will redouble my efforts this month, but that's exactly what happened.
I appreciate that update.
Very professional, nice guy, though. Mr. Selectman. Whoa.
Andrea, 2 weeks from Saturday is the annual Springtown meeting in Plymouth, Massachusetts. And we're going to, one of the articles that the board has sponsored is to get our legislative body to approve the 2-year pilot extension for fiscal year 20 and 21 at $7 million and $6.5 million for fiscal year 21. So obviously, if there's a license transfer, that Holtec will honor that 2-year extension, correct?
I am actually working through Joe on that agreement, but I believe that is correct. I'm sorry, I believe that is correct.
Okay. The sources of the $13.5 million, the source of the $13.5 million will not be the decommissioning fund. Is that correct?
No, that is incorrect.
It's going to come out of the decommissioning fund?
Yes.
Okay.
David?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure I have a question for Andrea, but maybe just an observation. Although I certainly appreciate you attending and understand the position that you're in and what you can answer and what you can't answer. You know, I think part of that is really that the panel doesn't have the leverage to compel the answers. And I would hope at the end of this discussion, recognizing that Becky's here and Becky is listening, that we find a way to communicate some of these priorities to the state so that, because they have the leverage to get these answers, I feel more confident. You know, when I think about the town's priorities, I know that Becky's seen the list, the interagency working group has seen the list. It might be helpful if we prioritize as they're negotiating, you know, these are the most important, or put them in some sort of order. I'm not sure the 15 are in order right now as far as priority. But I just don't think we're going to get the answers from Holtec, unfortunately. I share your frustration, and I think the state has the leverage to get those answers. And maybe it's an interim report to the governor or some other way to formally communicate that. But I think the panel would probably appreciate the opportunity to make sure this was top of mind when the state's having those discussions with Holtec and Entergy and whoever else is involved in that discussion. So thank you for the time.
Jack? Pass. Richard?
Andrea, thank you for coming here tonight. Let me try to help out a little bit if I can in an indirect way. Having worked 40 years in licensing and permitting and regulatory review and evaluation, I've sat in your seat before, and I certainly understand why Entergy and Holtec were using the 25 MR per year NRC standard regulation for your PSDARs. Notwithstanding that, in reality, the state has been pushing for the 10 millirem per year cleanup standard. There's disagreement on what's good, bad, or indifferent. Has Holtec, I know you can't get into MOUs or anything going on behind the scenes, as Becky had indicated earlier, but has Holtec been considering or evaluating behind the scenes the impact or potential impact on its decommissioning cost estimate and ability to meet the 8-year decommissioning timeline if you had to comply at some point with the 10 MR standard?
So our decommissioning cost estimate that was submitted to the NRC does have substantial conservatism in the conservative factors in the estimates related to waste removal. And so we do have, plus we have a significant contingency factored into that estimate. So we have not looked, we've looked at preliminarily at, as we were going into discussions with the Commonwealth, at what the impacts could be. And we are confident that we have some significant margin between the 25 and the 10. But I'm not going to sit here and say that, yes, I can absolutely meet the 10 at this point. We are working on what it would take for with the discussions with the Commonwealth.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Sean. I'd like to start by personally apologizing to each of our state regulating bodies that are here, that are participating every month, that participate every day in regulating the power plant while it's operating and when it's being decommissioned. Okay? After Fukushima, within days, we had the state inspectors with the federal inspectors. They were pulling them out of retirement. They were, and I know only because I had to guide them on the tours, okay, but it was quite inspiring to see our state and federal, it made you proud to pay your taxes, okay? So we welcome regulation, okay? It makes the people who work there safe. It makes the public who live close by safe, okay? Just a thought, though, for the good chair. When the good chair did mention, I'm not buying this, there's really only one buyer in this room, okay? Because if we want to, we can just make it so that Entergy keeps the plant and we can go to Safe Store and the decommissioning fund can stay intact. If we want to do things over and above, okay, what's envisioned, then we can think of the Goodmas Pine, we can think of elevating the Issafi pad. But for 30 years, when Boston Edison was a regulated utility and collecting from the ratepayer, it wasn't to pay for moving of pads. Okay, so the fact that that's been extracted, that that's been recognized, now you could take that same argument and add it to the 25 to 10 millirem standard, okay? All of the collection of that $1 billion was under certain rules and regulations of the time. So if there is a company that can meet all of those things, is willing to negotiate on those things, then I think it's our duty, okay, to pursue those avenues and pursue them, okay, to everyone's satisfaction, okay? So I thank everyone for their patience with me. I'm sorry. The good senator?
Senator?
3 quick questions. In the past, have pilot payments come out of the decommissioning trust fund? Do we know?
No.
Not during,
So what is the precedent or the regulatory ability now for future pilot payments to come out of the decommissioning trust fund? Is there a precedent for that in other cases, or?
I'll try to answer that, Senator Wolf. Once you shut down, obviously the rules change regarding, the sources of funds that you have for paying certain costs. There are rules involved in what are qualified withdrawals from the trust fund, and property taxes have met that rule in the past. I know that one of the other plants that we've decommissioned or transferred into decommissioning use those precedents. So that's probably the reason why Andrea made those statements.
Thank you, Joe. And one other question, which is sort of unrelated but might be related. To your knowledge, and I know a lot of the information relative to the sale of the assets from Entergy to Holtec are proprietary, was there any requirement in the agreement that the status of the plant, which was rated at a 4, be at a different rating prior to the sale or transfer? Was that a condition of the sale, to your knowledge?
no, it was not.
It was not a condition of the sale?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions before I close this part? Yes, Pat.
Yeah, my role is mostly looking at economic development and the impact that the plant closing had on not only the town of Plymouth, but also the region as a whole, from the western part down the Cape and every place else. My original question was, after all these things are taken out, how much funding is really available to do all the closing and doing it right. And also, if there is any opportunity for potential economic development in that particular portion of the land that's available for future development and stuff like that. Or is your role basically to sell the land later, or?
So since we have not yet been approved for license transfer, there is no definitive planning that has gone on for what the land, how we will deal with the land moving forward. As I indicated, we are willing to work and get into discussions with the town.
Any other questions? With that, first I'd like to say, and I know it's not easy, Andrea, thank you very much for coming. We do appreciate it. Just in closing points, I just want to summarize a couple of things. One, and I thank the selectmen for bringing this up, everybody who's a resident of Plymouth, including all of our town meeting members, should understand that the intention of both Entergy and Holtec is to take taxpayer, ratepayer money to pay their taxes. That seems to me, as they consider whether they'll agree with this pilot agreement that was negotiated with Entergy, that you said you'd go with, you'd adhere to, that taxpayers' money is being used by a private company with no bid, with no transparency, with no knowledge of what the transaction looks like, to pay for the taxes themselves. If that were the case, I would personally argue you could have been a lot more generous in the pilot payment, but I appreciate the selectman mentioning that. That's first. The second thing, and it's just a fundamental position, we're not talking about selling a paper route here. You would not sell a house with this kind of lack of information about anything involved until after the closing. That's what you're basically asking for, and I find it unacceptable. But thank you very much. We appreciate you coming.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes,
Cover bringbacks for that session of our.
please do.
So I had one bringback from Holtec. That was, we can't hear you. I have one bringback from Holtec, and that was to review the status of the Holtec dry fuel storage contract with Entergy, or provide us an updated status of the dry fuel storage contract with Entergy. And the second part, second follow-up is with, that we would carry over, is for us to communicate with the Environmental Protection Agency for a presentation of the MPDES process. Any others that I missed?
See him in the,
I think sorry, Jack, I think it's more than just the process, it's when are they going to get around to it?
Noted. Okay, thank you.
thank you very much, Andrea. Before we move on to our next agenda item, Becky, I have to apologize. I failed to compliment you. For those of you who have been concerned about hearing impaired and the ability to help hold these hearings so that you could participate better, Becky has been working diligently to get this resolved. Hopefully by our next meeting, I won't promise that on her behalf, but I just want to let you know that she has been working very diligently to get this resolved. As you may know, the panel itself has no funding of any sort to get this done. We rely on the generosity and goodwill of agencies from DPU to EEA to get what we need done. I'm going to go begging for some new cards shortly because we've had some changeovers, so that just tip you off it's coming. But thank you very much for all your efforts on that.
Yeah, absolutely, and I would just add that it will help us make those arrangements ahead of time to know the next meeting date as soon as possible.
Easy. It's third Wednesday of every month, 6:30 PM, except, who remembers?
August and December.
August and December.
Unless we change it. But I bet you by
Unless
this
it's last year, in which case we'll meet anyway.
Yeah, I bet you this year we're all gonna want August off. I'm only saying. But that, thank you. Joseph?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The chairman asked that I give an update on the status of our employees. So as you know, at the last meeting, John Orenberger, who could not make it tonight for some reason about a vacation or something. I didn't know we allowed that. But anyways, I did want to update you on some of the facts and figures. First, the Entergy Talent Absorption Program. This is for those employees who will not have a position in the new organization. We have 103 employees that are currently in that process seeking various opportunities within Entergy. 44 have now committed to new positions within Entergy. That's up 10 from the last meeting. We were at 34 the last time. And we have 22 that are continuing to advance through the process, which means they're in various stages of getting offers and accepting offers and asking questions. At the last meeting, we had 51, so we're moving through that. And then we had a small fraction of people that withdrew from the process. So they evaluated it and said there wasn't opportunities that they deemed necessary or met their requirements. We continue to provide information to our employees about things like 401K plan benefits, pension benefits, both for the bargaining and non-bargaining units. Those are ongoing. I think this Friday we have a whole series of meetings and opportunities to learn more about that process. We also are engaged with the Massachusetts Department of Labor's Department of Career Services, things like resume writing, interview skills, and information about unemployment opportunities and relocation services. We also are offering what I consider fairly unique training opportunities for future career opportunities. 3 of them that are going very well, in my opinion. A professional engineer license prep, there's 2 employees taking advantage of that. A course in wastewater treatment license prep, 8 employees are taking advantage of that. And then 20 employees are engaged in what is known as a project manager certification. So these are all ongoing, being paid by Entergy for the benefit of our employees. And there's a series of other ones that are coming up that I'll report at a future meeting. Other initiatives, these are both federal and state programs. One I had mentioned, the Mass Department of Labor is working closely with us for different opportunities, up to and including an Entergy system open house, which is going to be scheduled shortly. And then finally, we're working with the U.S. Department of Labor on a benefit called the Trade Adjustment Assistance Program. If this is approved, it will provide additional benefits to our employees. That application is in. We did get a follow-up series of questions, which we submitted to them today. They committed to start evaluating that next week, and we'll hopefully hear back over the next couple of months. And I have the lead on that, so I'll be able to report back rather quickly on the status of that benefit. Finally, Entergy continues to place our employees in the Phase 1 organization. This is the organization that'll start after we cease operation. We plan to have that organization fully staffed in time for our scheduled shutdown on May 31st of this year. The actual transition to Phase 1 would occur once we're defueled and we've certified to the NRC that we've permanently ceased operation. In the interim, Entergy will staff all positions with qualified individuals through Phase 1 to ensure a safe transition to decommissioning and then eventually to serve in the emergency plan, which is a major part of the role of the Phase 1 organization. We're not in a position to comment on any individuals or the makeup of the Phase 1 organization at this time until it's fully staffed and we have all that information final.
Any questions from any members of the panel?
Are there people that are going to be transferring over to Holtec within the organization?
I believe that those individuals within the Phase 1 organization will have opportunities to have positions with CDI and possibly Holtec, but I think it's primarily CDI.
I meant the
right.
decommissioning. Thank you.
That's correct.
Joe, how many people are totally there now? You know, you gave us about 160 people.
What is our current, I think we're up 570 employees right now. We're typically a little over 600, but we've had people retire just through the normal course of ending their careers. But we're right around 600, 570.
So what's your estimate of how many people are going to be left there after the closing and stuff?
There'll be roughly 300 people that will be in the Phase 1 organization after we shut down, defuel, and certify that we're no longer operating.
Point of information, I think to clarify for Mr. Pat, we got out of 300, and then I think there's 2 more phases. Would that be correct, Mr. Lynch?
That's correct. So Phase 1 will last approximately 10 months. Our target date right now with NRC approval, we haven't received NRC approval for the changes, excuse me, to our emergency plan after Phase 1, but that will be on or about April 1st of 2020. At that point, we will roughly cut our staff in half, and then the last one would be once we move all the fuel from the spent fuel pool to dry fuel storage, and then we'll go through another transition, and again, that'll be down to another smaller subset of those 150 people.
Thank you.
And that's scheduled to be complete by the end of 2021.
Yep, David?
Joe, congratulations both to you and Paul and to the workers for going from 4 to 1. I recognize that's an achievement. Is there, just in case there's questions in the minds of the public, is there any scenario at this point now that would keep Pilgrim operating after May 31st?
Not as far as Entergy is concerned.
Okay.
It just logistically, we haven't ordered fuel. We're not in any position, we did not have a refueling outage. So essentially, when we shut down in May, that's it.
Any other questions? I just have one, Joe. I know you can't talk about individual cases at this point, but we've certainly, members of the panel, have heard from friends who work there that some senior people that we were surprised to hear, and we don't know, will be leaving come June. Is that accurate, just in a general way?
I really can't comment on any individuals making those decisions. We're in that process right now, so it's kind of a day-to-day changes. So I think it's probably better that I wait until the entire organization has been filled. People have made commitments to those, and then I can discuss more freely that we have a fully qualified and a fully staffed Phase 1 organization.
Senator, did you have a question?
Just a really quick one, just so I know I have to keep repeating this in my mind, but the levels of complexity sometimes seem overwhelming. The employees from Entergy who are going to be involved going forward, employed by someone, are they employed by the existing Holtec, by the existing CDI, or a new company which does not yet exist? Who will they actually be employees of?
Well, I can only speak for Entergy, but for as long as we're the licensee, as long as we own the plant after shutdown, until if and when the transaction is approved, there'll be Entergy employees. And then at that point, they will be provided opportunities to seek employment with, I believe, CDI, which is one of the partners of Holtec as part of their decommissioning organization.
Okay, so the part of the levels that I'm having trouble with, and maybe I'm just a simple thinker, the license is being transferred to the existing corporation, which is Holtec. But the employees are going to be employees of a corporation which the license is not being transferred to? Just, if somebody could clarify, Mr. Chairman, maybe you could clarify it, because I'm having trouble following this.
I think I can.
Okay.
Go ahead,
Okay.
Paul, give it a shot.
If the transfer never takes place, okay, and Mr. Lynch closes down the plant, okay, in short order, we're gonna go from 600 people to 300. 10 months after that, we're gonna go to 150, and maybe 2 years after that, we're gonna go to 25 or 30.
Yep.
If the license transfers anywhere in that time, the number of people still goes down, but the people that are there don't work for Entergy anymore, they would work for whoever the new owner is.
No, that's this is Abbott and Costello here. I mean, who's on first? The question I'm asking is, who is the entity that they're actually going to be employed by?
It depends on who holds the license.
I don't think so. That's not what I'm hearing, because the license is being transferred to Holtec, but CDI is actually going to be doing the work.
This is very much a groundhog experience.
I'm not intentionally being
No, you're not. No,
obtuse,
this was the
completely
reason for the
intentionally,
whole
just sort of
beginning line of
intentionally.
questioning.
Yeah.
Let's just go through what we think we know.
Sean, I can.
Hold on one second, Jim.
Tell you what the license transfer application
Says, okay.
specifically.
That'll be a good beginning.
It says Holtec has a contract with Comprehensive Decommissioning International, LLC, which is a joint venture company comprising Holtec and SNC Lavalin to perform the decommissioning, including demolition and site cleanup.
So,
So that's the company.
with that, what it would appear, although we can't be told these things yet, it would appear that Holtec is the one doing the acquisition. Once Holtec does the acquisition, it will receive the $1.028 billion, and then it will form a separate new LLC with CDI, SNC Lavalin, that suddenly gets infused with over $1 billion of ratepayer taxpayers' money, with no bids, with no transparency, with no assurances on any of these things. They will then decide who this is. They will then decide who they want to keep on and who they feel is necessary. Now, I personally believe they'll try to do a great job. You'll have your moments in a few minutes. So, that's what I think. Is that about accurate, Joe?
I think it was a gross generalization about how it is all going to play out, and I wouldn't agree with the way you characterized it. But not to make this complicated, but to give you an example.
Please.
There are licensees who have their own security force. They're their employees. There are those who use a private security force. Both of those models meet the NRC requirements for ensuring that you have a security force. So when this transaction occurs, it would not be unusual to have a company that holds a license with support organizations that provide all the qualified workers, whether it's radiation protection technicians, a security force, engineers. You can do it as employees or you can sub it out. So CDI is an integral part of their team, and my understanding is they would be the organization that would make the offers and hire the people and then meet all of the license requirements, even though the license might be under a different name.
Thank you. And I mean, being a corporate guy as I am, the complexity, and it really isn't that complex, I am being intentionally obtuse, but usually one of two things is happening. Usually either we are creating levels of complexity that address the liability of a corporation with assets and trying to shed those liabilities to places where there is not the depth of asset. That's one reason to do it. The other reason to do it is through the transfer to extract wealth or profit, or as you put it, a public resource which has gone into the decommissioning trust fund. And in each one of these transactions, money is extracted out through the transaction. The sale of the assets from Entergy to Holtec, the creation of an LLC, and then yet another transfer of assets to a new LLC comprised of, and I'm with Pine on this. I'm actually glad that it's going to end up in the hands of people who understand how to build a cask and how to decommission a plant. But we could have our cake and eat it too. I just want to say that. Entergy could stay involved and subcontract the work to the experts, and therefore remain as a fiscal responsible entity and still contract the level of work that we should expect and will get. So I just want to be really clear. This is about liability and corporate profit and extracting money out of the $1.028 billion. That's what this is about. And I just, I think there needs to be transparency about that. I don't think there's a freaking thing we can do about it. Because over the last number of generations, our government agencies, slowly but surely, have been whittled down to the degree that they can't do a thing. And we sit here and watch a corporate shill game. But at least somebody should say that. And I thank you, Mr. Chairman, because while you danced around it gracefully, that is in fact what you were saying.
Well, the only thing, because I want to get to the public and then the old, is it starts really with who's buying what and how much are they paying for it, and who's paying for it. Andrea was unable to tell us that tonight. Maybe you could tell us, Joe, what's Holtec buying this for? Simple question. Paying $1, they paying 10 million, what are they paying?
I guess to build on Senator Wolf's comments, certainly a model that has been used in this industry is the licensee remains as the overseer of the decommissioning process and then hires 100 subcontractors to do the specific work tasks. Obviously, that's very expensive because there's an oversight organization and then 100 companies that will be making a profit on their little slice of the pie, whether it's removing asbestos or taking down a building or segmenting a vessel. What Holtec has done is they've put that all together into one company, and they said, we can do the whole thing. We start with expertise in the storage of fuel. We have a decommissioning entity that's done it elsewhere, and then we're making a commitment to get rid of the fuel at the end. And that's a business model that they believe can work, and they've created a process that has provided the interest on the part of Entergy.
Sean,
Thank you,
a
Joe.
big
Mr. Chairman, if I might, though.
Yeah.
Holtec could have set up that company, and Entergy could contract them as a single entity to do exactly what you described. So again, I don't want to get into an argument, but I think there are models, Joe, that would not have relieved Entergy of some of what I consider to be the responsibility that should be tied to the profit they've been making by operating the plant. That's all. That's.
I understand your point.
A quick question for Joe. At this juncture, Joe, is it the best of Entergy's knowledge that Holtec, or the conglomerate CDI, is the only entity commercially available that can do decon in 8 years or 12, 10 years? Are there other fish in the sea out there? I'm not trying to negate using Holtec, but if something didn't work out, I know SNC is being evaluated internationally about, I won't get into that, we all saw the news reports that were circulated, but are there any other folks out there that Entergy could use if push came to shove to still stay with decon?
Yeah, thank you, Rich. 2 comments. One, in Vermont, it's a company called North Star.
North Star.
So there's
maybe they can't do more than
a second
one at a time.
company. And to correct one of the comments by the chair, it was a competitive bid process that arrived at Holtec being selected. So there are others out there.
That's wonderful to hear. Why was that not shared publicly?
I just shared it publicly.
No, I mean, the details of it. The details.
I'm just correcting the record.
Okay.
Just a point of information through the chair, okay? Perhaps the DPU would like to talk about it, but I would remind the members of this board that it was in 1993, and the great Senator Murray, who railed against deregulation, okay, and selectmen from the towns of Millstone, Connecticut had to be carried off their desks ranting as to this is a greater misappropriation of public funds since the Teapot Dome scandal, when 21 power plants in Massachusetts got sold to the lowest bidder. They were all built with ratepayers, taxpayers' funds.
Burden you bear of knowing history, Paul.
Sorry.
Any other questions? Thanks for not on the other one. Any other questions? All right, then we're going to go on to old business. One of the things that we talked a lot about at the last meeting was the ability to try to stay on top of those topics which had come before. So I tried to do my part of that this week, leading up to the meeting. And my first one appears on page 3 of the previous minutes, and it was, Joe, unfortunately, you're it again. You believe that it was about 1.5 acres of land will be now taken up with the new pad. Is that, you thought you were going to go back and check that, but
I was not able to verify with the drawing, so I apologize. I will send that out to you for the benefit of the entire panel by the end of this week.
all right? The second one was Pine's discussion on the permitting issue. I gave you the update on where Mr. Papadopoulos stands, and hopefully we'll have him the next one. Unfortunately, Joe, the next one comes to you again. The conversation was with Mr. Priest requiring a log be kept of the radiological spills, and that we should review that information, and you responded that you'd check to see if that was available to us publicly. And you can give the same answer. It's been a busy month.
No, I actually did follow up on that. So the file, which is known as a 50.75G file, is a record since day one that we have maintained. It is not something that is electronic. It's a very manual file. It is something right now that is part of the ongoing litigation because there's been challenges as to the environmental characterization that was used in developing the cost estimates. So at this point, that information is not public. And if there is a point in the future that it is, I will make sure that that is made available to the panel and what opportunities we would have to allow that to happen.
Just maybe the chair could get some clarification on this. We had this discussion, Joe, you weren't at the work group meeting recently, but it was indicated to me that we might be able to see it in a room with some redactions and stuff like that, but not get any copies, not really have a lot of time with it. Is that what you're suggesting? So, just so we're prepared, armed.
No cameras.
I envision 3 options that have worked in the past for similar types of requests, and I'm not talking about 5075G, but information that is kind of sensitive. One would be an opportunity to review it in a location where we have control over, you couldn't leave with it. Second would be to have one of the agencies of the Commonwealth that has open and free access to the records to come in and audit on behalf of the panel. And the third would be to have someone come in and give a summary of it, someone who has looked at it.
You mean to the panel?
Literally, these are manila folder files, so they're not, today they would be electronic, so I shouldn't say that. The ones that were more recent history, we would have electronically. So it's pretty voluminous, it's pretty time-consuming to go through these. So I'll evaluate all of those and report back what we can make available.
Can I ask a follow-up? There must be a summary, though. If you based your cost estimates, or they based their cost estimates on this historic stuff, I would assume you use some of that anyway. You know, some was, here's the structures, and this is all we have to take down, and some of it was, this is the legacy, and this is what we have to deal with, too. Hasn't that been summarized already?
Well, I'm sure it has, because it would have been made available to Holtec for them to do their due
Right,
diligence.
that's what I'm thinking, right?
I'll have to see whether we have something like that, but I'm assuming we do, because my offer of having somebody talk about it wouldn't be, you know, they need to spend the next 500 hours reviewing it, that they should be able to speak from a summary. So I'll have to look into what's the best option for that.
Any other questions? Yes, Mr. Selectman.
Joe, I had asked a question a few months ago about the timing of entities showing up to the Zoning Board of Appeals and Planning with respects to a presentation on the second pad. I was told before that would happen in the first quarter of 19. Obviously, that's not going to happen. Is there any update with regard to that?
In regards to the second ISPC pad, you know, we have submitted the zoning application. It has been approved. We were not asked to come in and present before zoning for that. We're now moved on to the building permit, so that's been submitted for consideration by the Director of Inspectional Services. But if there was a request to come in and make a presentation to either that board or the Board of Selectmen, we'd be more than happy to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, I just want to go back to the issue of the radiological spills. I mean, you make it sound like, and maybe it's just choice of words, that this is a big file with a lot of incidents. I mean, have there been a lot of radiological spills? I mean, I just want to make sure it's clear how you're characterizing what might or might not be in those files.
Yeah, I appreciate the question, David, and a chance to clarify. It's not so much the volume of the number of spills. You know, our industry is created with paper. So every time we have a spill, we have to fill out a procedure documenting where, when, how much, and what we did to remediate. So it's a volume of paper as opposed to, you know, there's been 7,000 spills or anything like that, so.
Thank you.
Any other comments? I'm ready for you, Joe. The next one out of old business was Mr. Coughlin was kind enough to, again, as he pointed out, that we were having a tough time keeping up with the details, and he prepared and sent me really an excellent list. It's only 3 pages. You're unbelievable, Joe, of all of the topics. One at a time, I've been trying to work through them. It's going to take a little more than the time allotted, Joe, from the 17th to today, but he's done his work again. It is great, it is detailed, and we'll try to get through all of them. With that, Mr. Coughlin.
Appreciate it, Mr. Chairman. Just as you covered at the beginning of this agenda item, I think it's a good start for our subsequent meetings in the future by putting the old business, new business item on here. Simple as it is from an administrative standpoint. When I went back through, when I was requested by the chairman to go through the January and the November minutes, there were a number of issues that were raised by various panel members, very good points being raised, whether they were to speakers or just in general. And yet, just like months prior to that, that I didn't look at in specific detail, that we never follow up on. And if we have concerns on the front end enough to raise questions that we want some follow-up action on, by whomever it is, then we've got to follow a process to make sure we close the loops on each of those questions or points that we've raised. I was surprised, actually not surprised, at many of the issues that were raised that were quite good, quite specific, yet they die. Nobody follows up on them. Even the one who raised the question or made the point that requires some sort of follow-up to close that loop. So I appreciate the chair putting, as simple as it is, the old business item on there, and then maybe for the next meeting, it might be helpful from a standpoint of time if that list could just be circulated to the members, and then those who have raised the issues can decide what do they want to do at the next meeting with regard to either making a statement to complete the loop or getting the answer from the source that it needs to come from. But it's a lot of important stuff that I think we need to close the loops on. The second issue was, that the chair asked me to follow up on, was the suggested outline for the annual report, which I did, and I provided. We didn't have enough time at the last meeting, so I was happy to follow up on it. And I provided a separate sheet with comments or suggestions for the changes to the outline, changes from the annual report that we did last year. Maybe also for the next meeting, to save time, if those could be circulated to the panel members, and then you all can come prepared to decide what are your thoughts, what kind of changes might you want to make for that, because we do need to make some changes. We operated differently last year, and we're not operating the same way, so some changes are needed. I just simply took a shot at it and see what your thoughts are at the April meeting.
Here's what I'd like to suggest, and Samantha, you get your first involvement, whether you like it or not. Your predecessor, Kurt Swartz, was our guiding light when it came to the open meeting law in the Commonwealth. One of the things that Kurt reinforced frequently was that we couldn't have the dissemination of this kind of thing that might result in some form of a deliberation, which was always an issue. So what I'd like to suggest in this one, Joe, if you will send to me, with your permission, I'll use this one, but also the new outline. I will distribute it to all of you if you will all promise, and I mean promise, that you will not then start deliberating and communicating with each other until you get here. Because gosh knows we don't want to violate the open meeting law. But your point is well taken. We will disseminate to everybody. Everybody will get a copy. But you cannot, and I say you cannot, and I heard you promise, Rich, go back and forth between each other, offering your comments on any of it.
Can I just, I think that's good. Question for Selectman Mahoney. John, as a Board of Selectmen member, you operate under the open meeting law too in terms of posting meetings, and we can discuss, but you do receive packets of information to be discussed per the agendas for each weekly meeting that you have. So is there any difference here, what we're talking about? I don't see any, but is there any difference here in having such information like that or other information so we're all not hamstrung time-wise or otherwise to get that ahead of time if it's going to be it's going to be posted on Sean's agenda for the following month or any ensuing months? Just your opinion, John.
I don't know why that would be an issue. We typically receive a PDF via an email, sometimes on Friday, Rich. You all get our packets. If there's anything in executive session that's segregated out, but the rest of it's public. The rest of it's public.
God bless you.
And, you know, obviously the board, we don't engage in back and forth emails because that's what the Tuesday night meeting's for. So I can't imagine there would be an issue with that.
I wouldn't either, but just for the record. record wanted.
Mr. Chair, I'm a little
Yeah.
confused that I have sent you those
Yeah,
documents.
I just wanted your permission and the board understanding that we're gonna send them out.
Please.
Like, you- you-
And regarding the open meeting laws, Kurt was nice enough to send us a lot of information on that in the past, in the beginning of this panel, and I don't see any conflict with sending. I've read them as a former federal employee. I've read them chapter and verse, and I see no conflict. But as you said, sending them out for information, not discussion or deliberation, and simply saying, come to the next meeting, be prepared to discuss these, end of issue. I don't see any conflict at all.
And you all promised. Okay. I saw you, Senator. Any other old business that I've missed? Hearing none, we'll move on to new business. Is there any new business? Paul?
Through the chair?
Yes,
as
sir.
We discussed, was reviewing, and I'll be brief, I'll synopsize. This is kind of a continuation of what Mr. Coughlin was identifying, action items that are coming out of a review of the meeting minutes from last month. There was a statement regarding cancer rates in Plymouth, and it just hung there, and it left you with a question of, well, is there or aren't there? De facto, that was a question that was considered by the Nuclear Matters Committee for the town of Plymouth on at least 2 occasions. And at that time, the good Mr. Coughlin, Mr. Grassi, Mr. Rothstein, Mr. Ady, and Mr. Mahoney.
Microphone, Paul.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mahoney, for pointing that out. So at that time, the Nuclear Matters Committee always had a medical officer on the committee. We had Drs. Rushforth for a while, and then we had Dr. Nuremberg. So it was looked into. The facts of the matter are, there are statistics. There are statistics that are gathered by the state, the Department of Public Health. There have been investigations in the past. Vectors go to like the Cape Cod Power Plant or to transmission line right-of-ways. But there was no correlation outside of the statistical variability and allowance for Pilgrim Station. And that's what the 2 reviews by our medical officers on the NMC found. But it lingers in the meeting minutes, and one can't read the meeting minutes without knowing is it or isn't it. So I was going to suggest, and I was glad to hear Mr. Coughlin say, when such issues are significant, are raised, we should take an action item, and we should direct it to perhaps a member of the board or to the state, which does look exactly for those correlations. So I thank you.
Are you suggesting in this particular one that it might be great to ask the Department of Public Health or whoever did the studies?
Yes. So what I would suggest is that we as a board note it as an action item. You can assign it to me if you want, or to Mr. Coughlin. And what we can do is take the written word from the meeting minutes and pass it on to the proper authority.
Okay.
I'd like to ask the question, how does that apply to what our scope of work that we're trying to get accomplished right now is?
And I can answer that. It does not apply to the role that you play on the NDCAP, but it does apply to the Department of Public Health in its greater view of the health and safety of the public. You'd agree with that, Jack?
I'm not sure what you're asking us to do, Paul.
Okay, to verify that there is or there is not a correlation of an increase in cancer rates compared to the operation of the plant, as is suggested in the meeting minutes.
Well, let me just offer a thought here. Since we've all been very clear from the very outset of the panel that we are strictly looking at decommissioning and not at operation, this look back is entirely for the basis of clarifying the record in our minutes. That's your point, is that there is another side to the story from your perspective, Paul, correct?
My point is that in the conduct of our business, okay, the public has brought an issue to our attention.
Yeah.
We have a responsibility, okay, to pass that on to the proper authorities, not for us to rule on it, not for us to make a judgment.
Let me see if I can offer an easy solution. If there is existing documents from the past when these studies were performed that can easily be provided, would that be satisfactory?
from having served on the Nuclear Matters Committee, I am already satisfied as to their existence and their conclusion.
Okay.
But the Department of Public Health, which looks at the Department of Public, at the public's health and risks for the public, should be aware that this statement's being made and should have a judgment on it that's public.
Okay. All right.
Thank you for your indulgence.
Any other new business? Fine.
I should have jumped in on the old business, but it kind of crosses the barrier. I just want to emphasize that the comments on Entergy's PSDAR are due tomorrow, and there's a very easy way to do that by going to the regulations.gov, folks in the public, and making your comment there. My concern is, and my comment will dwell on the fact that Entergy, should this whole deal go through, you don't have 60 years to decommission the plant. And given the newer science and that wasn't even mentioned in your PSDAR, that it's absurd, as I commented to the NRC when they were here in town. And I would just urge people in the public to make that comment.
Okay. Any other new business? Joseph?
Yeah, at the very end of our February meeting, the chair had requested a motion, and it was approved, that you would contact the NRC to discuss the panel's concerns about the March 4th deadline on comments on the Holtec PSDAR. That date has obviously passed, but nonetheless, a motion was made and approved by this panel. And the question is, just like I mentioned before, that's an open-ended issue. Even though the date has passed, nonetheless, the panel had made a commitment to do something. So where is that issue?
I missed it. I did. I missed it.
Another item in the minutes for the 30.
Just to be clear, Jody, you're talking about the second to last paragraph on page 7.
Yes.
I missed it.
Very second last sentence.
Yep, got it.
On the previous page, our colleague Senator Wolf had suggested asking the IWF to include a report on the integrity of the dry casks in their work after one of the members of the public had brought the issue up as a concern and so forth. A fair request, but the question is, where is it? What happened? Is there going to be such a request made or not, or is the issue dead?
I did not follow up on that one. I didn't take an action item out of that one. You're talking about right above it. Senator Wolf asked why the comment period for the Holtec is due and asked if an extension can be granted for Holtec PS.
No, this is on page 6, third paragraph, up from the bottom. It was in response to a comment by one of the members of the public, concerned about the safety of the dry casks. And Senator Wolf made a good suggestion in the end that there be some sort of a follow-up, asking the IWF to include a report on the integrity of the casks in their work.
I didn't take it as something I was supposed to do, but I still think it's a good idea. And I think this new process, Joe, if you don't mind, and it's going to be a burden on a monthly basis, as soon as we get the minutes, go back to the notes, shoot me an email, and we'll try to distribute it or get as much done as we can. As everybody knows, we are without any administrative staff.
Right.
Go ahead, Senator.
Yeah, just to generalize on that point, I mean, it does seem that we need probably a more formal process between us and the IWG.
Yep.
Just so that we can have that dialogue and make those requests and ask them directly. You know, we think, we're concerned about for example, the integrity of the casks, past, present, and future. Mm-hmm. Is there a way we could have some state oversight or involvement in determining that? It would really be helpful if we had that kind of relationship with the IWG. I think the intent is that we have that in the future, but.
Well, since Becky was silly enough to stay for this, when she could have gotten out early, do you mind coming up for once? Hey, if you could just come up in 1 second and suggest to us what the right method would be for us to do what Joe and the Senator just accomplished.
We'd be happy to take requests. I just want to acknowledge the realities of state government and resources, which is that, I've worked for 10 hours today and I'm going to stay till the end, and then we'll come back at it tomorrow. So to the extent that we can prioritize the requests, make them as clear as possible, and really think about what would be responsive, happy to take questions.
So the best way, I'm just thinking about this from a process point of view, is for the, rather than you getting requests from 21 individual panel members, is for the individual panel member to send the request to me, and I forward it to you with his or her email, and we take it that way. Would that be the best way? Anybody got a suggestion?
Yeah, I appreciate what Becky said and the concerns on resources and time, as well as senators. It almost seems as if it would be helpful to all the parties if, to the extent that we raise questions collectively, or singularly, whatever, if we then list all internally what our questions are, and then the panel makes some sort of a decision on priorities. Are there some stuff that's just, it's nice to know stuff, but why the hell push it on the state when it's a simple issue that maybe we can answer amongst ourselves, or it was an intellectual question that doesn't really need some sort of a formal follow-up, and have the panel make a decision, or the chair make a decision on, okay, these appear to be the most important ones that we'd like to that we really need some response from the state for. We just can't answer them ourselves, but not to burden them with just nice-to-know stuff.
Then hearing that, unless there's further comment, why don't we plan on the new business and old business? I'll put that as a subcategory to bring up at each meeting, and we'll compile that list and chat about it and send on a list. That work for you, Becky?
Yeah, and I know I said this, but I will just add a plea that, we are working flat out on preparing materials for license intervention. Everyone is doing this in addition to their other responsibilities, so to the extent that we can follow up on that and really make sure that a question that comes to the interagency working group is really something that can only be addressed by the interagency working group, and that it's been prioritized and agreed upon by the entire panel, that would be much appreciated.
So it shall be. Richard, thank you. Sorry to make you get up again. You should go home and get some rest.
Sean, something you had asked me to make note of under new business. Yesterday, I received an email news release. NRC seeks public comment on potential meeting locations to discuss community engagement panels for decommissioning nuclear power plants. In a nutshell, the Nuclear Energy Innovation and Modernization Act that was signed into law this past January included a requirement that the NRC submit a report to Congress by June 2020 on best practices for community engagement panels in areas surrounding nuclear power plants that have ceased operation and begun decommissioning. And the NRC, in that regard, plans to consult with host states, communities within EPZs of a nuclear power reactor, and existing local community advisory boards. The NRC is planning on a minimum of 10 public meetings in locations that ensures geographic diversity across the U.S., with priority given to states that have a nuclear power reactor currently undergoing the decommissioning process, and request a public meeting under the provisions of the Act. There was a March 18th Federal Register notice where the NRC gave specific instruction for members of the public to submit comments through the federal government's rulemaking website, and the docket number is NRC-2019-0073. And they conclude that the best practices report will include a discussion of the composition of existing community advisory boards and best practices identified during the establishment and operation of such boards, such as logistical considerations, frequency of meetings, and selection of board members. I just want to say, in terms of operation of boards, I think members of the public have heard, as we've enumerated individually, collectively, not at this meeting, but in past meetings, some of the constraints that our board operates, our panel operates on, what we can say and do and what we can't say and do. So I'd encourage members of the public to consider writing to the NRC and offering thoughts and suggestions about the fact that you've witnessed how this panel has been operating in the past year and a half and what we've been able to do or not do. Some of it we're hamstrung by open meeting law, but get the facts out there. I realize every community, host community may have different ground rules, and every state may have different ground rules about how panels should be formed or what they can or can't do, but we're here now. We're going to have a decommissioned plant starting, the process starting May 31st, and there's no time like the present to get the word out. Maybe that'll have a little impact on our state legislative process and what we can do or can't do in the future to be a more effective panel if we need to be more effective, in fact. Thank you.
Any other new business? Yes, David.
Mr. Chairman, I was going to say one thing, but I'll change my mind. In light of what Rich just mentioned, there's also an NRC meeting, I believe, on Tuesday in Plymouth, and that's another opportunity for public interaction with the NRC.
Yep.
So I don't know if you just want to highlight when that is. I'm not exactly sure.
Does anybody have the details? Mary, you probably have 'em.
It's
I am at the office, I didn't.
It's Tuesday evening at 6 p.m. at the 1620 Hotel. Doors will open at 5 o'clock, and it's the annual assessment meeting for 2018 performance of Pilgrim Nuclear Power Station.
Thank you, Joe. Any other new business? Hearing none, we'll go on to public comment. We have many new visitors tonight, so thank you for joining us. And for you, I'd just like to explain how we operate our question and answer period, because it's a little different than most. I'm going to ask you in a moment to raise your hand if you'd like to make a comment. We've allocated 20 minutes, so if 5 of you raise your hand, each of you will get 4 minutes. And between Mr. O'Reilly and I, we keep pretty good time on it. So with that, please raise your hand if you'd like to make a public comment. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How did I know? Is that it? 5?
Yep.
Okay. So, starting with that, why don't we go left to right this time? Please identify yourself, and remember that we have about 4 minutes per person this evening.
Good evening, John Gawley from Hingham.
John?
Thank the panel, most of them. I was the citizen that made a comment on the integrity of the casts.
Yep.
The casts are passively cooled with salt air. So when the salt air hits the hot steel, there's a condensation that happens. And the steel that Holtec is using in their casts is proven to corrode and crack after 17 years. So I really would like to have the Attorney General address that. I've sent a lot of hard copies to the Attorney General's office. I just don't trust the integrity of the cast. And they don't have a emergency plan intact when the cast cracked. And that's another concern I have. The other concern I have is they're talking about moving it to Mexico. So even if it sits there for 10 years, New Mexico. All right. Nervous. I don't do this public thing, right?
Doing fine, Joe.
But, if they're sitting there for 10 years, however long they're going to sit there, the steel's going to lose its integrity. And then they're going to put it on a train and bounce it across the country. That's a threat to the whole country. I just think Holtec's a bad idea. Seems like we're rushing into this thing really quick. It's got going from the fire, or the frying pan into the fire, right? And I don't know why we haven't seen other entities come in, especially if it's taxpayers' money. Seems like corporations are making decisions for the will of the people one more time, and it just doesn't fly with me. And the last comment is, if Holtec was so interested in our community, why did they leave? Right? I mean, they bolted as soon as they got finished talking. And thank you for putting on the pressure. You're my new role model. But they should have stayed if they're interested in us as a people, right? So that's my stuff. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Sean, can I just clarify that I
Yes.
don't represent the Attorney General's office, I represent the administration, so I just want to make sure that's clear.
That makes everything
Well,
different.
pay attention to what I said.
We have next on this side. Who's the next one up here? Okay.
My name is Susan Carpenter from Cape Town Winders, and I have had a very bad feeling ever since the meeting when Holtec and SNC Lavalin were here. And it doesn't get any worse than what I've read lately about the casts and about what's happening with SNC Lavalin. And I'm wondering, if Holtec gets to buy the property and gets to decommission, they talk about joining with SNC Lavalin. Is there anyone that has a voice in whether Lavalin comes on, or is it strictly up to Holtec to do whatever they want at that point?
We certainly don't have that answer. The only thing I will tell you is that the NRC is reviewing the application, the submission. And this advisory panel, like you, has read everything, and we don't have any role in that. We honestly don't. It's a great question to ask. The press should ask it. They should pursue it. But unfortunately, as a panel, we're simply advisory.
I didn't know if anyone in the state, aside from this panel, might have a voice.
I don't either.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Who do we have next? Oh, back row, Diane beat you to it. This way tonight, Mary will get the final word.
Hi, Diane Turco, from Cape Town Winders, and thank you so much for what the panel did tonight. You're wonderful. But, you know, Holtec's CEO admits that the canisters that are being used here at Pilgrim can't be inspected or repaired, and so, again, we're following what's happening at San Onofre. So what is the plan? I was hoping Holtec would stay, but they ran out. What is the plan to repackage leaking or cracking canisters?
They won't tell us what the warranty period is, so I'm not sure that they'll share that with us.
Okay, so we don't know any plan, because we know at San Onofre it's 25 years.
Am I
But if
mistaken?
the concrete cracks,
What
that
is?
warranty is void.
Joe, if you can clarify that.
Yeah.
I don't have any updated information on the warranty. If it's something that we want to follow up on, we certainly can, but I think it's been presented at numerous meetings that the solution for a canister that needs or has a flaw would be to put it inside an overpack canister. I think it was presented at previous meetings that they have a design that would be the model, but they have not had any failed canisters.
Okay, but they have a design, so what is the plan right now? Because you have how many, 17 casks on the pad now?
We have 17, that's
Yeah.
correct.
So what is your plan now to repackage any leaking or cracking canisters if something happens?
We don't have any leaking. We have an inspection program to ensure the integrity, and then we would go into an off-normal procedure if there was such a thing, but that's why we have a monitoring program.
It's my understanding they can't be monitored, inspected, or repaired. So you have nothing, so the overpack, do you have the overpack right now on site if something did happen?
No.
Okay. Is the overpack system approved by the NRC?
You'd have to ask Holtec. That would be part of their license for the system.
I don't believe it is anyways. So during decommissioning, another question about the pool. So we understand that transfer would be in a pool, but if the pool is destroyed during decommissioning, again, that would be a question of what would happen if a canister leaked or cracked.
That's correct. There would be a procedure, a process for how you would address a flaw in a canister at some point in the future. But you know, we have not had that in the industry, but Holtec has the science, so.
You know, I think that's like not planning for something is a real serious concern. They didn't think Fukushima would happen either.
Understand, that's why they have plans.
Plans don't resolve an issue that's happening. But thank you to the panel, and I'm not buying it either, Sean.
Thank you, Diane. Jim, you're on. Were you in the original group?
No, I just wanted to make a quick
Okay.
clarification to everyone that while I am not authorized to speak for CVI and Holtec, they are my colleagues, and I'm taking copious notes and writing down all the questions.
Excellent.
Good for you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would
You want to get on that Cape radio, you can't ruin the mic.
watch me. Would point out that this meeting, as you've posted it, has another 21 minutes to go, and I would hope, as long as people are interested in what people have to say that the panel would be willing to sit around until it's 9 o'clock closing time to listen. I want tonight talk about money, because there's been a lot said about it, and I think there's a lot of clarification that needs to be made. One question that was asked is, what is Holtec paying for this? We've not heard an exact answer on that, but we did hear from Mr. Toomey a couple of meetings ago that the consideration would be nominal, and the example he gave us was $1,000 in the Vermont case. You can draw your own conclusions. Second question that came up and keeps coming up is that of profit. I was told by a Holtec representative, talking to him at one of these meetings, that Holtec built its profits into its estimated costs, which didn't really surprise me. My understanding, talking to a number of people who deal with various types of businesses, is that a company like Holtec wouldn't get into this business, particularly into this business that's going to tie it up for as long, unless you were talking about a profit that was at least in the 25 to 35% range. What does that work out for Holtec? It works out to $250 to $350 million, which isn't a bad return on a $1,000 investment. But that's not the end of the profit story. The real question on profit comes down to something else that you've all discussed tonight, which is Department of Energy funds. You've been here, and I've been here, and we've all heard Holtec say that it will make you no guarantee, it will not agree to put those DOE recoveries back into the DFF or commit them to decommissioning costs. When Holtec filed its license transfer application, they said that the only financial assurance it was going to rely on was the DTF. As I think you all know, I know we've passed Pilgrim Watch's papers to you, both Pilgrim Watch and the Attorney General, to put it mildly, have very serious questions as to whether the DTF can possibly do the job. Our clear understanding, looking at all these numbers, is that they cannot. The cost of decommissioning will almost certainly exceed by hundreds of millions of dollars the amount of money that the DTF will ever have in it, including what they're going to gain on their 2% annual return. I really have to congratulate the people who put the decommissioning cost estimate together. I know they spent a lot of hours working on it. What I do wonder, though, is how many hours were spent working the numbers so they worked, so they could come up with cost estimates that would somehow show something left over at the end, even though it's about 0.3% of what they started with. Well, how does it tie to the DOE? Well, apparently when it filed its responses a few days ago, Energy and Holtec recognized that there were some serious questions raised about whether the DTF had enough money in it. So they started pointing at, gee, look at all the money we're going to get back from the Department of Energy. And the number they kept throwing around was $500 million, which just happens to be the amount of money that people can take out of, assuming the exemption's granted, and nearly always is, the DTF for, quote, spent fuel management costs.
Yep. If I could, Jim, 1 second. I'm going to give you about a couple more minutes because I do want 80% of the people here come down from Boston and elsewhere. I want to get them out as early as we can, so 2 more minutes.
Let's just say quickly that Holtec has said in its responses, oh, we have the ability to put this money into Holtec Pilgrim, who's actually going to own the fund. What they have steadfastly refused to do is guarantee that they will do so or agree to do so. And the answer, why, is very simple. Because if Holtec International gets that money, it goes into Holtec International's or some other subsidiary's pocket, and you've just added $500 million to what was already $250 to $350 million. Any wonder that they want to get into this business? Any wonder that they won't agree to make the funds available where they will really have to be used for decommissioning? The only answer is we prefer profit to anything else. And if people here want to bother reading it, I think you will find that both the Attorney General's submission and ours, and there will be responses filed before April 1st, make pretty clear that there are all kinds of reasons that the assumptions that Holtec used to justify their decommissioning estimates in large measure simply aren't so.
Thank you, Jim. Mary?
Some investment. So what's the bottom line? The bottom line is that without enough money, there are two choices. One choice, and the obvious, is the Commonwealth will get to pay to get the job completed. And also that the job will never get completely done, because the Commonwealth will get tired of using taxpayers' money for a problem they see only in Plymouth, not thinking the impact on Cape Cod Bay, which means an impact of all communities that have waterfront properties facing the bay because of how the currents and the tides go. And so the beauty of this area, the economic value of this area, is the cleanliness of this area. And it clearly is under a threat because the money is not there. They, both Holtec and Entergy assumed, made all these assumptions how they could make it look like it worked on paper. They assume, and they give their money in 2018 dollars, assuming not what NRC's answers and questions and answers state, and Callan Associates state, that the escalation in costs is far greater than the 2%, number one. Number two, they assume that all the fuel is going to magically disappear by 2062. If it doesn't disappear by 2062, and if you take the fact that they say it's going to be, what, $7 million a year to babysit that fuel, but they only have $3.6 million left over, 1 year they've run out of money if the fuel stays to 2063. Then they assume essentially that the site is clean. We know it's not. The site opened up with bad fuel, was listed as the dirtiest plant in the country. They didn't put in their off-gas treatment system until 87. They blew their filters in 82. Jack Priest's declaration for the Commonwealth lists other areas that there will be contamination. So just like at Maine Yankee, just like at Yankee Atomic, just like at Connecticut Yankee, there are always those surprises. More contamination for you and I to pay for to clean up. Clearly, what they should have done, but are not willing to do, is to have a serious, full site assessment at the beginning of the project, so they can then make an honest cost assessment and also take care of the stuff that sea level rise and climate change will take care of by putting it back into the bay. That is one of the contentions the Commonwealth has, and one of the contentions the Pilgrim Watch has. They make numerous assumptions that make absolutely no sense, so that the numbers appear on first look to come out, but they won't.
In the attempt to make sure we preserve the tranquility of the Lampert household, I am also going to grant you 2 more minutes.
Okay, in 2 minutes, another subject. It is very important that we keep pushing for the less than 10, less than 4 radioactive, radiological cleanup standard. But as important is for the dose assessment. Okay? It's important that we have what's called the resident farmer model, and Becky, I hope you're listening to this, and the basement inventory model. I circulated a Canadian report on our favorite SNC Lavalin that pointed out that they got a big grant from the Canadian government to deal with radioactive waste at various sites near rivers. Their way of dealing with it was, and this is what can happen here, when the building was taken down, like the reactor building, to 3 feet below, then they filled it in with cement. Then they took the dose. So over 90% of the volume was clean fill, leaving contaminated basements, floors, sides of buildings, which then can leak out and cause big-time problem. At Vermont Yankee, North Star agreed to the basement inventory model. Holtec should too, or if they bail out, Entergy should, because otherwise you're not getting clean, you're getting a fake average, and dilution is not the solution.
Thank you.
I did
Mary.
it.
You did it.
What?
Glasses survived. I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Oh, yes, one quick one.
Jim Lampert's comment jogged my memory, and 4 or 5 years ago on the NMC, I know the topic of decommissioning trust fund and recovery of spent fuel storage from DOE lawsuits and so forth and so on came forth, and my memory might not be correct, but I'm trying to remember for Joe Lynch, if Entergy were ever considering putting those recovered monies back into the DTF, if DTF funds were used or wanted to be used for that purpose. I know this discussion took place at the time, and if the answer is yes, that Entergy was considering the possibility of doing that, would Entergy, is it too late for purposes, since the license transfer hasn't taken place, for Entergy to require Holtec as part of the sale to put any recovered monies from any DOE lawsuits back into the DTF? I don't know if you can answer that, but it's certainly a reasonable question I think should be pursued.
Yeah, certainly nothing I can address, not knowing the details of the transaction, Rich, but thanks for the comment.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye, aye, aye.
Thank you very much. Would you pass